The Reset podcast is sponsored by Bose. With my new Bose QC35 headphones, nothing gets between me and my music. The noise canceling is world class, they're completely Bluetooth, so there's no wires. The sound is amazing. My producer and I love these so much that we use them to record every single show. For more information about Bose QC35 headphones and other Bose products, check out Bose.com. Hey everyone, welcome to the 6th episode of the Reset podcast. I'm your host, Laura Mignott, co-founder of the brand experience agency Digital Flash, and we're coming to you from New York City. Each week, I bring in an influential friend from marketing, business, or even government, and we delve into what's really happening in the industry and try to make sense of it all. Of course, we can't talk about business without talking about how it impacts this very moment in time. We'll laugh, we'll debate, and we'll give frank insight into the ongoing world of business and how to navigate our way through it, all while enjoying wine and french fries on my couch. Tonight, I'm so excited to have Safeena Mecklai, AVP at Capolino & Company, to talk about how we can reset local politics. And so, Safeena, so good to have you, girl.
Laura, it is so great to be here.
With this podcast, I try very hard to make people feel super comfortable and I
always feel that way around you
because I'm so cuddly. I'm so cuddly.
Yes,
I'm like a teddy bear. I'm brown and soft. See, samesies. And so I always start off with an icebreaker question. And what was your first job?
Yeah. So,
oh God, which was yesterday.
So my first job that I didn't make for myself was Right. So my first job I didn't make for myself was as a Kumon tutor. So I corrected small Asian children's math homework, and that was weird and sort of depressing.
Why were you checking? Why was it only Asian children?
Because that's who used Kumon in the city of Sacramento primarily.
Oh.
Was these 9-year-olds doing 12th grade calculus.
Algebra? What?
It was both depressing and exciting because that's the future.
Oh my God.
But my first real job was not Kumon.
What? Okay, back up. How old were you when you were checking 9-year-olds' homework?
I was in high school.
Okay. And which was yesterday. And
nope, so long ago.
It wasn't that long ago. It was less than 10 years ago. Shut up. Am I wrong? No. So how does one even apply? I mean, hi, I want to correct little kids when they're wrong.
I wish that it was an application. I was a classical Indian dancer at the time. And my dance instructor decided that she also wanted to open up a Kumon branch.
What?
And
classical Indian dancer?
Yep. Trained in Bharatanatyam. But in, a good Indian way, she called upon her friends and family to staff her new Kumon. And that
because?
Right.
And so basically it was forced child labor, essentially?
I mean, I didn't make as much money as I should have.
Were you legally employed?
I mean, there's no way of knowing now, right? It's too far.
Did you get paid in cash or in
Yep, in cash.
Okay. Under the table.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't want to get Kumon in trouble, but probably that's the case.
It's okay. Who's listening? Not the federal government or anything. Probably. But it's okay. Okay, so you get this job at Kumon. You're teaching 9-year-olds how to do calculus.
Yes, but before then was my first real job.
Okay.
So I moved to the U.S. when I was 9. And I met my cousins. They're my second cousins. There's 2 of them, and they're the same age as me and my sister.
Wow, you guys really planned. Your family really planned it out.
I know. I wish that was the case, but they're not that forward thinking. It just so happens that everyone decided to have kids in whatever year I was born. Right.
In the 80s or 90s, I don't remember.
Who knows? And so my cousins would come over all the time. We'd hang out. We'd play.
So you guys were all twins, basically.
We felt like twins, sort of. And 3 of us have names that start with S's.
Oh my God.
So we were basically a little clique, which was awesome. The clique at the mosque, that was our thing. We formed a clique. We hung out at mosque. We were the cool kids at mosque. That's the thing.
Yeah. For morning prayers, you guys were Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. And anyway, so they would come over all the time, and I would start paying them to do stuff because I had change lying around, and money was interesting because we were young, and I would.
So were you mob boss of the
Sort of.
mosque?
Yes, that's basically what happened.
Oh my God.
It was pretty awesome.
Jesus.
So I would be like, I'll pay you $1 if you brush my hair for me. Yeah, it was incredible. I was like 10 now, right? And I was like, I'll pay if you brush my hair. And they did it. And then I realized like we probably shouldn't be using money to fuel my own personal beauty endeavors. And instead decided...
I don't see why this is an issue, personally. Just saying.
I don't know. Somewhere in there I decided like maybe I should do something better with these like quarters that I have in my bedroom. And we formed a little charity organization. And we were called the S Girls. My name was S Boss. So yes, we were truly mob bosses. Oh my God. And the other girls were like S Princess. And like we had cute names. My sister's the only K. And she was cute S. So like we figured it out. Entrepreneurial spirit.
Gotcha.
Marketing, etc.
Branding at a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. And we used to do dance performances
And pay and charge people?
and collect donations
For yourself.
and then donate them to our local library.
Oh.
And that was my real first job.
That explains how you got to your current job.
It does.
You do now make the world a better place.
Yes.
So it's a good,
hopefully.
kind of, sort of, but maybe not. Sometimes. Every other Tuesday.
Yes.
Because you do have like the coolest but kind of the most complex job, yet you're still a child. So, which always sort of horrifies me because I usually am the youngest person in the room, and then I see you and it makes my skin crawl. I'm like, oh, I'm so proud of her. I'm like, oh, I'm so proud of her because she's like a grown up and like wears like suits to work, and I am wearing sneakers as I sit here on a Friday afternoon.
That's my dream. You know that.
I know.
Okay.
That's why I always come to your office dressed as casually as possible, just
I will
to mess with
burn
you.
my suits to the ground if the opportunity arises. I'm ready to go.
You are going to be locked into Ann Taylor for the rest of your natural life.
Okay, I'm like a Banana Republic girl still, so like not even.
No. Why don't you give us a bit of an overview about like what your kind of cool, complex, off-the-wall job is?
Yes. So I am a registered lobbyist in the city of New York.
Not the devil.
Not the devil. The city of New York is a good place to be a lobbyist generally. The city has an $84 billion budget, so people like me exist that specifically work to lobby the government for things. But most of my clients are not-for-profit organizations that want city contracts. So the city contracts out a majority of its services. So these are like great nonprofits that do amazing work that we just need to convince the city to give money to.
Over here.
So that job is awesome, right? That's easy. And then a big chunk of my other clients, like you, are minority and women-owned businesses.
I'm a minority?
Yeah, we're teddy bears, right?
That's right. I'm a brown teddy bear.
Right. And so that's like convincing the city to contract out in a way that encourages equality of opportunity. And
that's a fancy way of saying, please hire brown people.
Yeah, basically.
Right.
It's 4 to 5% of city contract dollars right now are spent on minority and women-owned businesses. And I talk about equality all the time, and sometimes it feels really esoteric and emotional, but economic equality is something that's easy to solve. And
hire us, people.
Yeah, and the Minority and Women-Owned Business Program literally mandates that the city spend money on brown people and women.
And they still won't do it.
And still is not being implemented to its true, beautiful potential, in which companies like yours, companies that are run by minorities and women, will bring back their success to their communities and then fuel further equality and all the social problems that we talk about solving with other ways like education or feel-good town halls can be really solved with tangibly giving people money who haven't had access to that money.
It's basically fuck you, pay me.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like fuck you, pay me sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny because we've talked at length about how I hate this system because it's unless you're an old, tired white lady, you don't get a job in the city. And it's like, that's lovely for old, tired white ladies, but they're not hiring people who look like me. I'm hiring people who look like me or you, or are gay, trans, immigrants. We're the folks who are actually taking the chances on on those types of employees that people who are already in the system don't need to. And if you gave those folks a chance, one, you help build a better place that we can all be in. But two, you're right. Economic diversity is economic freedom.
Totally.
And the issues that people have would be vastly improved if you just took a look at what, from an economic standpoint, of paying attention to what this all looks like. So, we are recording this after the earth-shattering election, whereby, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think, one of the things to kind of talk about is, like, how do we reset local politics? Because I think we've seen a lot of folks now saying that, like, okay, now is the time for me to get involved. I think I was sent some friends from your way. And like, how do I really tangibly get involved? Because nothing is going to change unless, I make a decision to do something. Yep. So I think it'd be kind of cool to sort of hear your take on that. Yeah.
So 2 things. One is that when the federal government changes, the biggest impact that it can have on local government is really the budget. New York City's budget relies on a lot of federal money. And so if programs like the Obamacare system are dismantled, the state of New York can lose up to $800 million. Jesus Christ. And 60% of that $800 million goes to the city. And all of that directly flows through the city budget out to impact the tangible lives of people that we know on the ground. And so some of that will impact the way that politics is done on the local level because the budget will get tighter.
And so people will be fighting far more for every single dollar.
Absolutely. But in a different way, local government can also stand really firm and strong and push itself not to reset in the face of federal change. So what you've seen happen in New York City is the mayor's really positioned himself as a foil to Donald Trump. Also a New Yorker, but somebody who prides himself on his equality agenda, who rose to power on populist ideals, really. Right. Somebody who has fought for immigration rights, for healthcare rights, for minorities and women to get involved in the contracting system. And so what he's doing is really doubling down on the policies that he's written for New York and the policies he's championed for New York and saying, New York isn't going to be what your federal government looks like. Our city is going to continue to look like New York City. And what that looks like is strengthening the policies that are on the ground to protect communities of color.
Disadvantaged communities.
Absolutely. And it also looks like being vocal and standing up and saying just because we're in government, it doesn't mean that we're going to change and modify the way that we run to look like your government, because New York always beats to its own drum.
Well, yeah. New York is it is a microcosm of anywhere else in the world. And it's almost like New York is its own country, especially New York City. Because, like, having grown up on Long Island and knowing that I always used to make a joke about Long Island being the 51st state, because you can live your entire life on Long Island and never set foot in Manhattan.
Totally.
And have a very different worldview as to what this country is about versus someone who lives within the 5 boroughs. And I think a lot of times that's where a lot of disconnects come, because
definitely
New York really is this overflowing melting pot where people can pretty much, you can be whoever you want to be.
Mm-hmm. That's what draws a lot of people to New York.
That's what gets people to want to come to the city. And it can break people. It can make people.
Absolutely.
So when you're thinking about, like, hey, I now want to get involved in local politics, like, what's the first thing I should do?
You should join your community board. So New York's governance system is insanely complicated, but each neighborhood basically has a community board that represents their interests. There are 50 members on a community board. They're looking for young people. They're looking for new people.
Should I do it for my board?
Absolutely, you should.
In my neighborhood?
And they are hugely important advisory bodies on land use issues. They have a role to play in approving liquor licenses.
What?
So,
okay, you had me at liquor licenses. I'm going to find out how to do this now.
Yeah, so they don't have formal authority in that, but they can basically make a recommendation that the state decline or approve a liquor license because they know the neighborhood really well. They also, the beautiful thing about local government, and the reason my background is absolutely in local government. Before I moved to New York, I was working in the city of Berkeley's local government, another
super liberal
place of its own that's tried to succeed from the country a few times.
Yeah.
So
we're over here.
Yeah. But local government, when it does something, it touches people's lives. Local government can be the difference between the planter on your street having a tree or not having a tree. It's the difference between the extra turnstile at your subway stop. It's a bus timer. It's fixing a sidewalk, a pothole. It's getting money for a senior center. Whereas the federal government and the presidency is a lot about these big declarations about policy. I hate X. I'm hugely great at Y. This is terrific. Local government is really tangible. So the ways to get involved are to get involved in those conversations and those fights. So joining your community board, finding an advocacy organization that does work that you like, finding a nonprofit that you can support in your area, reaching out to your local council member. New York City's council is 51 people. That's a lot of people that you can reach out to and talk about your issues with. And
is it a local? Is it a local one that you can go to? So, like, say, like where I am downtown. Mm-hmm. Like, is it someone downtown that I would say I have to like kind of Google my local?
Yeah, yours probably is Margaret Chin, maybe. And you look up your council members, set up a meeting, call them, tell them, I'm a young person. I really want to get involved. These are my issues. This is what I care about. Or I have no idea what I care about. I'm just really terrified after the election and I want to help. And they'll find something for you to do. Finding mentors is another really good way to do that. Finding somebody in your community that you see out on the street all the time.
Not the crazy dude who's like selling hats.
Yeah, probably not that guy.
Okay.
Unless you love that guy, that's fine. I work with an amazing woman in the Upper East Side. One of my clients is a company and decided they wanted to give back in New York, hired us because they had a national idea of how to give back, but no idea how New York City works. And that's oftentimes how we get clients is, oh my God, New York City is so crazy. Weird. What do I do? And we facilitated this relationship with this one woman in the Upper East Side who runs a group called the Upper Green Side. Very cute. And she plants trees every day, plants daffodils.
What? She ain't got time. How long has she been retired? Like 50 years?
She must be like in her late 60s and has been retired for maybe 10 years.
And she plants trees every day.
Yeah. So maybe not trees every day, but daffodils, tulips. She's like in tree beds every single day doing work that she just learned how to do because her street didn't look the way she wanted it to look.
Okay, one, she's bored. Two,
she's like sort of amazing though. Like she has knee pads that she goes around and is on the ground fixing her local planter. And you know what? You thinking about that, it's sort of like, oh, it's cute, but it's also like, if I'm really concerned about climate change post this election, right?
Right.
Planting trees is an important thing you can do at a really local level to combat that.
You literally plant trees. So what did the company do with her?
So they are purchasing a tree. They identified a planter at her recommendation. They're buying a tree and buying a guard.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. They're buying a tree and a guard. I'm installing it. And today, actually, they're out planting daffodils with her. And this is like a huge company who just said, I want to give back. And the best way to do it is find those people who are already doing the work in your community.
So it's really about just local, hyper local civic engagement. Mm-hmm. So, if you're not in somewhere like New York, how are ways can you to kind of get involved? Like, because, New York is such an unusual place.
Yeah.
But like, if, this podcast obviously will be recorded and distributed in places that are not in New York City. So just sort of like high level, like if you have it, does every state have a community board or does it work differently for every state?
It works totally differently for every city. So we always tell people this, that the way to be good at navigating government is to spend hours and hours learning how government works or talking to one of us because we already know. But the behemoth that is government in every city operates so differently. And finding the places that actually create change, the little levers in government, you might say, you could go online and look up, how do I get a tree planted? And you'll be directed to one person. But they may not be the person who approves the budget line for the tree. So you're going to spend weeks
in the
months
weeds
and years trying to get this tree planted until you work really hard to figure out, so who is it that actually can make my tree happen? And so doing that work and getting a bunch of friends together and saying, only I would do this. So let's
clearly
take apart the
only
city charter and figure out how this works.
So if you're a policy nerd, and
it's easy, right?
It's easy.
But if you're not a policy nerd, there are other ways to get involved.
Google.
Sure. Google is a huge way to do that. But like if you're somebody who has money, use your money. Put your money into organizations that
you care about.
that that is important to you. That's a big way. Volunteer your time. I mean, for Planned Parenthood, for example, you can volunteer to be a navigator for people to navigate the Planned Parenthood system, to find the resources in their local community. And that's something like you, for example, would be great for. You love talking to people. You're friendly.
I
people
don't like
trust
talking
you.
to people. I don't have
You're
a trusting
a cuddly
face.
teddy bear.
Not a cuddly teddy bear. You know.
And that's like a job you could do and would make a huge impact on real people's lives.
Right. So it's really about, I think it's a lot about getting back to the kind of person to person, like we are each other's keeper.
Yeah.
In order to actually, as people try and navigate through this universe.
Yeah.
How do we sort of get there? So I unfortunately can't become president because I was not born here. Mm-hmm. But, my mom still has this idea in her head that one day I'll be some sort of famous politician. And I keep trying to tell her not to waste her bubble, but who knows? So say I wanted to run for local office. Mm-hmm. How do you even do that? Because I feel like there's been an influx of people saying, well, that's it.
Yep.
Now I want to be a congressman. Because, clearly the people who represent me don't represent me, or, voices of people who in communities that I care about are not being taken really seriously. So we want to throw the bums out.
Yep.
How do I do that?
Great question. So I can answer this from two perspectives. One, as somebody who works in New York City government. Two, I was the front runner to run for a city council seat in the city of Berkeley after we led a redistricting campaign in the city and decided not to run. And
because you were too young. And you weren't allowed to drink alcohol. So you're like,
I think I was 21. I was 21 at the time.
I knew I was ready to go. I knew it.
But that wasn't the reason.
Which was yesterday.
Running for office requires the best people who are in office have an incredible balance of humility and strategic thinking. People think, and the people who are often the quickest to raise their hands to run for office are those who would never think to ask the question, am I the most qualified person to do this job? Can I do this job? And it's a hard job, but the best people who run for office are ones that do it because they listen to the concerns of their neighbors and want to be the platform for that voice. And it's so much patience is required to think about the people that you know in New York City and the people who really complain about things in New York City. Being an elected official in New York City is constantly dealing with that and then having to forward your strategic initiatives and policy ideas and wanting to make the world a better place. So
you really have to have you have to have such a thick skin.
You have to have a super, super thick skin and a big heart. You really have to care about and this is maybe my bias. This is what elected officials should be like. But you really have to care about the community that you want to represent. And running for office is one amazing way to make change, and more women and more young women and more women of color and more people from underrepresented communities should do it and should ask how. And I'm happy to talk about that too. But also another way to make change is find something that's happening in your community and get involved. A lot of council members in New York came to power because of something like they were really involved in responding to Sandy. They were the ones on the street every day helping their neighbors access resources. And because of that, their neighbors saw them as somebody they could trust to represent them in other places. And so their political career came from wanting to do something, and then the elected office became the best vehicle to do that, as opposed to, I want to run for office, let's figure out what I care about. So navigating that and building your triangle the right way, either from the ground up or top down, is a choice that anybody who wants to run for office has to make. And then if you do want to do it, the best way to do that is to talk to people who are in office, go to networking events. In New York City, there are local publications like City and State. Most cities have a local publication. Go to their events, start meeting people, when I wanted to run for office in Berkeley, I called the mayor, met him at a coffee shop.
You got the mayor of Berkeley to come meet you for coffee?
Yeah, he and I were already friends at the time.
Oh, okay. Because I was like, damn.
We had run a campaign together. We were close. But I called him. We met at a coffee shop, sat at a back table. He knew everybody there. I was he's this wonderful old white dude. And me, this 21-year-old Indian Muslim student being like, so what do I do? And the first thing he said was, well, you got to raise money. how are we going to do that? And that's what running for office is.
It's about raising
right?
money. It's about money.
Yeah. It's unfortunately, in some cases, it's about figuring out how you're going to raise the money to run a campaign. And that's got to mean that real people believe in what you're going to do.
To put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, especially if you're like me, where my parents couldn't bankroll my whole campaign, as nice as that would have been.
Would have been awesome. That saves a lot of heartache.
That would have been a lot less stress. But instead it was, all right, so where are we going to start?
And so what made you decide not to run?
Yeah, I think two things. One, I think I was totally afraid. I mean, I think in two different worlds, if I was maybe a young white man, I would have known inherently that I could do a job, right? This is also a city council district that I was responsible for creating. We had redistricted the entire city to build this job, and then I thought, but I might not be the most qualified person to hold it. So that was probably a lot of institutionalized oppression, making me feel like I wasn't the right person to do the job.
Oh, gosh.
And also
the structures.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I had lived in Berkeley for 4 years. I knew my neighbors, but they were students and they were going to leave.
Right.
We made the council seat so that a current student could hold it and represent the people that they knew and interacted with. And I didn't want to be somebody who stayed in the district just to hold the seat.
Right.
And there were 1,000,001 other ways I could make change. I helped with the guy who ran for the seat the next year, endorsed his campaign, helped him think about his platform. I'm still really involved and care about Berkeley, but it didn't feel like my time.
It wasn't. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned it. Like, if you'd been a white dude, you've been like all for it. I think that's something interesting that I've been hearing a lot of from folks a lot recently, especially whereby yeah, sometimes I feel like if I just had the courage of a white dude, or if I had half the half-cocked ambition of a white dude, that I would be a lot more successful. And I think
lesson learned, right?
Lesson learned, but also is that we see that there's a picture a couple days ago of our vice president elect at Congress, and he took a selfie.
Oh yeah, that was a truly terrifying photo.
And it blew my mind because I was like, "Are you still this tone deaf?
Mm-hmm.
Are you people are marching in the streets, and so full disclosure, if you see a picture of me in this podcast, you can take one guess who I voted for. It ain't that hard. And everyone's gonna try and come together, blah blah blah. But what seems to be happening is that you have this weird split now. So it's folks are let's all come together, but then you see folks making actions that don't seem to get it. That the country is split. You have a popular vote winner and you have an electoral college winner, and so the way to sort of help those two groups kind of come together is sort of acknowledgement on both sides.
Absolutely.
So if one side is acknowledging, okay, we lost, and the other side's we won, so we're not going to do anything to change. How does that, and I know from a political side, you can't say either or, but how do we sort of get that?
Yeah.
Because I saw that selfie and I was like, dude, really? Don't you have one black friend?
Yeah.
Have one Muslim friend? One Asian friend?
There was some photo enhancing that was done. There might be a black guy that's in the corner of that photo.
It's in the back on the right.
Yeah, yeah.
But he might have been security.
Or he might have been brought in
for that photo.
Hey, buddy. And then snap. And then he was like, what? What am I doing here?
Yeah, I don't work here.
I've developed an entire life story for that guy.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's how do we sort of figure this stuff out? I mean, I think it's and I think from getting very local, how does a person who is in somewhere who is not in a major city, say for example, begin to sort of say, hey, listen, let's sort of help our communities get smarter about these things?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, my biggest belief on change making is it starts with empathy. There's the reason we got to this place is there are people who really think that they're right on both sides. And when it comes to arguing with someone on the other side, the argument is about, but I'm right. How could you be so wrong? As opposed to, tell me really why you feel this way. And you may be misguided, in my personal opinion. You may be wrong, in my personal opinion.
Wrong.
But I'm gonna work really hard to genuinely understand why you voted this way, because I think it's really hard to find somebody who truly believes they're doing something for a bad reason, including that selfie. It's really hard to talk to somebody who will admit that I took that picture because I really am a racist dude and I wanted to show everyone how white we are. That probably wasn't the intention.
Right.
So then the question is, so why? Why did you take it? What do you see that I don't see?
Or
that
do you
makes
not
think
see it,
that you're
or do you
right?
see something wrong with that photo? Like, I think it's also the problem
And
with
then
acknowledgement.
if the question is, I don't see anything wrong with that photo, then it's enlightening somebody as to why there might be something wrong. And or understanding why they really don't think something is wrong. And then you can talk about something that matters to both of you. And you can't move anybody who's on a polar end of a spectrum, right? Where people are most likely to move or change their ideas is somewhere in the gray. So you have to like really talk to people to get to their gray. And, you might just, for some people, just walk away from race, right? Like they will never see themselves as racist, no matter how many times they vote for racist policies or racist people.
Because they can't see it.
So how do you get somewhere where they can see something that'll make them understand who you are and where you come from?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think we were talking about this earlier that like, there's this call that like everyone should sort of accept where we are at right now. And for people like us who are, of color, where it's like, well, this is sort of...
That's not an option.
It's not an option because, like, you might be able to compartmentalize that, like, economic policy is different than racial politics because you have that luxury. And people of color don't. So how do we have a conversation whereby, like, the fundamental problem is that, like, you don't understand that, like, people's lives could be at risk.
Yep.
Or people's everyday occurrences are far more frightening. And it's not a joke, and people aren't making this stuff up, and it's not the media saying it like this. Like, how do we sort of bring those two groups together? Sometimes
it's as easy as having a conversation and coming at it from a place of genuinely wanting to talk to somebody about where they are, because people's news feeds are people reinforcing their own beliefs, right?
Yeah, like you are in your own bubble.
Yeah, and the local government level antidote to that is having a real conversation with somebody that you see and approaching it not from the words that you know in your echo chamber, but starting with their words maybe and understanding where they're coming from, and then really putting in their face who you are and why this matters. Because for them, in my case, Muslims might be totally somewhere else for them. They've never met a Muslim. They've never seen a Muslim. They have no idea what a Muslim could be. And they might meet me or work with me professionally.
And they have no idea
and
who
they
you
have
are.
no clue.
Right.
And so sometimes it's just saying, did you know I'm Muslim? And, I'm really involved. I've personally registered over 8,500 people to vote in my life. I care tremendously about what this country is and does and its future. And meeting me sometimes is enough to be like, whoa, Jolt, like you don't look like what I thought you looked like. You're not as scary as I thought you might be. And the reason they have those perceptions might be the people who are taking the time to talk to them are ones who aren't us, because it's exhausting. It's a horrible burden to bear to constantly defend your right to exist or to feel safe.
Well, yeah, that's the thing that I think really annoys me, that like we have this burden to bear, and then we have to accept when you people go lose your minds.
Absolutely.
Like legit lose your minds.
Absolutely.
Like I read an article yesterday by a friend of by Barrington Thurston and for Vox, and he was like, so basically you want me to have empathy, but you don't want to have empathy for me. And like, I should be okay with that. But so okay, if it's white working class people who voted a certain way, we should feel empathy because they've been knocked down and they've had their jobs taken away, and it's never coming back. And I get that. It's totally horrible. But like, and so this was their reason to lash out. I was like, okay, cool. But then they have to sort of understand that there's this whole other universe of other working class people who are black and brown, Muslim, Asian American, who don't have that luxury.
Yep.
Like, we can't be this angry. Like, when we talk about whether it's Black Lives Matter or women's reproductive rights or pay equality, like, or sexual harassment, like, we don't have the luxury of being like, oh, dude, like, I want to really break up the system because that's not cool for me.
Right.
And
the discomfort levels are hugely different.
Yeah, it's like you're supposed to be uncomfortable with this. And because like, oh no, but we're working class and we've had our jobs taken away. Yeah. Do you have any idea what it's like to be a black person?
So that's it, right? Like, that might be the conversation that needs to happen. We're dealing with a lack of mass media. There's no one we're all listening to facilitate that conversation. It's all happening in little pockets, and most of the time it's from people we agree with. And so, honestly, for you to go up to somebody who maybe you have like sort of a relationship with, you just haven't touched this subject, and to say, you know how hard it is to be me every day? They might say like, I mean, sort of, but for you, how is it hard? Because all politics is so local. You vote based on your family and
where you are,
your interests. And if your interests then become about, I want Laura to feel safe because Laura's somebody I know and care about, it might shift someone's opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting because you think about it, it's like, you know, when the person who got elected was talking about how African Americans live in inner cities, and I'm like, so I live in my doorman building in Lower Manhattan, and I pay a disgusting amount of money to live in that doorman building that has a private roof deck. That's not me. Mm-hmm. And if I think about locally, like this is New York City, where like people, you don't know, everyone's different, and it's like what everyone woke up on Wednesday was like, you know. All of a sudden, a lot of my white friends realized I was black because I got so many text messages from my friends. Like, are you okay?
Handling this?
Are you okay?
Yeah, I got a lot of those too.
I got like, are you? Do you want to go for a drink? Like, yeah. I'm like, yes. Actually.
Hey, once you're feeling good, let's go for a run.
Like yeah,
I would love to run right now.
I'd love to go run right into the fence, but I think that's the thing that's heartening, but also. Like, okay, so it took this happening for you to sort of understand that, like, my day is different than your day on a daily basis. Because, like, you see me, we hang out, we drink, we have a good time together. You see where I live, and the separation of two lawyers of who you think you know aren't there. You're just like, oh, you're just Laura. But, like, when you saw this thing happen, it's sort of like, you actually look at my picture on Facebook. You actually like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Like, you're someone, you have a different universe that I don't even begin to understand.
So for your friends, that's like a good empathy meter, right? Like they saw injustice and they thought, oh God, who do I know that might be impacted? It's honestly, it's a good thing for the people that have it.
Yeah. And then when you see who doesn't, you're like, oh.
And then you're like, oh God, we need to work on.
Defriend.
Yeah. Or in my case, I'm constantly in Facebook arguments.
Oh, really?
I encourage them. I was maybe clearly a debater, and I love doing it. And
well, what about that? Because I have a few friends who supported the other guy, and I have not defriended them, but I have hid almost all of them, and it's not because I want to live in an echo chamber, but it's because like I don't understand that how if you. A couple of them are actually Muslim and men, and I'm just like,
I know those guys.
What?
Yeah.
And so, how do us individually, like, how do we create? Because look, I think I'm not a good person for doing that, but I also feel like I have to sort of engage in self-care. I hate even saying that sentence. No. It's so terrible.
It's right.
It's so terrible that actually to say that sentence, but I feel like it's something that like we all have to do.
Yeah.
Like for your own mental sanity. And I was like, I don't want to see that. Like,
that's right. I mean, so the thing is there's no incorrect response. If the best thing for you is to like shut it out because it's emotionally exhausting, sucks you of life, makes it hard to get out of bed in the morning. That's not what your role in change making is. It's not your job to engage in those fights. But for those of us who are exhilarated by proving somebody.
No, don't get me wrong. I love a good argument.
But there are arguments that are too personal. There are arguments that are. I can't tell you enough times that I know people that have been killed for you to get it. And if you just don't get it, I can't have this conversation with you. That's fair. That it's too real, right? But for others who are willing, or for example, my boyfriend is a white male who served in the military, super lefty, went to Berkeley, all of those things.
How did you find him?
I know, it's truly a magical unicorn.
And does he have an older brother?
No, I wish.
Jesus. You know how much money you could make if you sold as a dude? I'll just sell dates.
I mean, I'm sure Mike will loan himself out for a couple dates if you're gonna pay.
Well, maybe he can be a wingman, so that like if I take one tall straight white male into a bar, then like more will follow me along.
He's like a little short, but he's like my height. We're both short.
Oh, he's short.
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
He's gonna hear this and this.
That's
but so he perceives his role. I mean, his newsfeed is like pretty 50-50. It's 50% really, really conservative people and 50% are friends who went to Berkeley.
Right.
And a lot of the time, what his role is as a white man who believes in this cause is to have those conversations and to engage them and say, oh, you thought you could have a really racist conversation with me because I look like you, and I'm just going to spend this whole day arguing with you about why you're wrong. Because I'm in a space of privilege where this fight doesn't impact whether I live or die tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's because, it's funny. I made the conscious decision early on in the election that I was not going to engage in any of those conversations. Like, I would see them, read them, and be amused by them, and kind of see where people sort of shook out. But I just said, like, it's not my job to change you. And do you think now in this climate that it is sort of our job to sort of like engage in those conversations, and it because, like, charity begins at home, and change begins one person by one person by one person? I
think, and this is, obviously my opinion, but I think everyone has a responsibility to act. I don't know what that looks like for every person. In some cases, and unfortunately, this happens all the time. Underrepresented groups are asked to do twice as much to get to the same place that someone who doesn't have to work as hard is, right?
Like, we have to make the extra effort and be like, okay, and we're going to ignore your casual racism here.
And that's taking up like 50% of my mental energy, and you still expect me to perform at 100% the capacity that you're able to with no care in the world. But so I think everyone has a responsibility to act. How you act is up to what you can do. There's low lift things, donating your money, sometimes donating your time. I think the lowest lift thing in the world you can do is vote. I mean,
that's the thing that irks the hell out of me.
I mean, like, it's close to 50% of people that turned out to vote, right? In New York City, of registered voters. And in the mayoral election in 2013, we set a record low for voter turnout with something like 22% of people coming out to vote. So I'm not saying go vote for president because it's like fun and you get the I voted sticker on the day when everyone else does. I'm thinking go vote when it matters, which is your down ballot races, your primaries, your city council member,
your off-year elections.
Yeah, those are the times. I mean, the mayoral elections are so weirdly in 2013 and now in 2017.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a hard year to remember to vote, sure. But that's, if anything, is your responsibility if you have citizenship and the ability to do it. Because I was not a citizen. I moved to the U.S. when I was 9 from Canada. Similarly, and can never be president. I wasn't a citizen for 11 years living in this country. I had a green card and was registering voters, was out there saying, please vote because what you do impacts me and I can't.
Right.
And so it's important to remember that, as you consider whether or not it's worth getting out of bed in 2017, it's worth it.
Well, yeah, it's like, do you think it's better just to kind of get folks more involved when they're younger, like in high school?
100%.
Because I feel like, I grew up watching the McLaughlin Group, like every Sunday, and my parents were very much like, it's very important that you pay attention to politics because, like, that shapes who you are. My dad always made a joke that, like, you want to be able to have a good conversation at dinner,
right?
To, like, know what's going on in your world. And so I always had a very sophisticated view about what politics meant, and, like, always voted.
Yeah.
And even when I couldn't vote, and I became a citizen. I came in when I was 3, but due to INS hating me, I didn't actually become a citizen until I was 21. So, I didn't get to vote until, like, the first election I voted in. Who was it? Was it Kerry? I think it was John Kerry. Yeah. So, it was one of those things where it's like, I wanted to make a difference. But when I was in high school, I remember we had our voting drive. But then I'm thinking, well, I went to a private Catholic high school on Long Island. And so, like, they cared about this stuff. And so they wanted us to, again, be smarter about this stuff. So is it really about the education that has to start? Because I feel like the problem we've had, a big problem we have is an education problem.
Yeah.
That people don't realize that, like, you can get involved in your local government.
It's an awareness problem, absolutely.
Yeah, it's totally an awareness problem. And, like, or, like, rather than you doing video games, here's some ways. Is it more about civics?
Yeah,
like, I think civics is missing from our universe right now.
I totally agree with you. So I was not one of those families where my parents said politics is important. We didn't watch the news. I didn't know about politics until I ran for student government for the first time. And because I wanted something small change, like the name of something, or I wanted better hours for lunch. It was like something so tiny, which taught me my biggest civics lesson and has inspired this career for me. But I mean, some council members at the local level have been championing this, but New York's voting access laws are really bad. We don't have early voting. We don't have same-day registration. It's impossible to change your party here. All of these stupid things.
It still has you listed as blank. I've now gone twice and it's had you listed as blank both times.
I'm
like, no, Democrat.
Narrative, right? So one really common sense voting reform, in my opinion, is pre-registration. That's where you go into a high school and kids are 16 and 17 and maybe they're taking their driver's test, so they're at the DMV already.
Yeah, that's what in high school.
You pre-register them and you say, give me your date of birth, and the second you turn 18, your registration goes into effect. You don't have to remember it again because you're not coming back to the DMV. You already have your license. We won't have you in an organized classroom where you're mandated to be. We don't have the opportunity that we have like when you're in high school to register you.
Because you're paying attention. I mean, like when we did it in my high school, I think it was our senior year, and it was like in September because like we were all seniors, so everyone was 17. So the next year we be turning 18. So we all did our registration basically at the beginning of our senior year, and then basically on January 2nd they basically mailed them all in.
Yep, that's a great common sense way to do that.
Because like, but then once you register, you have to go vote.
Yep.
Because when 50% of the country doesn't vote, and basically the decision of who runs the country comes down to 25%, essentially a quarter of the American populace, which doesn't represent the richness of the country, decides who wins or loses, it's a problem.
Especially when, I mean, even if it's not, I think even if you're really disillusioned with the presidential election, even if you really think, I live in New York or I live in California, my vote really, really doesn't matter, fine. To some degree, statistically, you're a little right. But you're not right at the local level. You're so wrong at the local level.
Because your local city council person can get that pothole fixed. That local city council person can get that program for after school. And I think, because, you know, I'm always a big champion of education. Because I think, especially being a person of color, education is what sets you free. And if we don't have an educated population, then we cannot move forward. You talk about empathy. Empathy actually will come from education. Because if you actually read about and understand that there has been centuries of issues with regards to the complexity of this country, then you can be a bit more empathetic because you saw it.
On the other, I think that's right. I think on the other side of that, and something that I, as like a college-educated liberal, probably struggles with, is for those who are not educated the same way that I am, the fallback has to be empathy. I mean, your argument to say I'm right and you're wrong because I'm educated, because I have the facts, is what failed us this election.
Of course.
Because if you're educated in a certain trade or educated in the life that you lived, it's a different kind of education, but it's equally valid in how you cast your vote. And I think a lot of people are struggling right now that we built a system that allows people to decide. And what happens when I truly disagree with what people have chosen? And we talk about electoral college reforms, or we talk about controlling the media narratives because people are just so wrong. But we gave people the right to be wrong. So how do you fix it from the ground up? Is it more education? Is it better after school programs? Is it facilitating community building? Is it getting involved? Is it corporate social responsibility? Is it more minority and women-owned businesses? There are other ways to build up that understanding, because at the end of the day, saying you were just so wrong because you're uneducated also doesn't work.
Well, yeah, I think it's about getting folks to understand that, like, the country is complex. And I think that, so when I'm thinking about education from early ages, like, even if wherever you are, it's still about understanding that where you are isn't the only part of the country. Whether you're in super lefty liberal land or you're in super red state land, it's like the world, you may think that you're just a little spot in the world, but like there's so much more. And I think that's what I'm saying about if you expose people as early as possible to seeing that, like, this country has so many different tentacles.
Yep.
That awareness is key. I think it's more about, it's like we're going back to what you were saying earlier about, like, if you don't know what my day is like, then you can't empathize. And if we don't start from a very early age of saying, hey, listen, like, okay, we may be in this farm in the middle of this town, but let me expose you to some other parts of this country. Same deal. If I'm super lefty liberal and, I've got all these amazing tools to me, it's like, it doesn't mean you're any better than the person who's in that small town.
Yep.
It's just your view of the world is going to be different. And it's like that sort of knowledge exchange. Like, I almost feel like you want to do like old school pen pals.
Yeah.
Like red state, blue state pen pals.
That's a cool idea, actually.
Or it's like, because like when we were in school, like we used to do that sort of like foreign pen pal and like, okay, you're in Japan, I'm in New York, and we'll send letters back and forth to each other. But I feel like it's kind of like something that we need now. Like, you need to understand, like, okay, my factory, my dad's factory is closed, and it's really going to be really hard for us this horrible winter because our winters get terrible. And it's like, well, yeah, but like my dad's little bodega is having a really hard time. And if we were able to sort of do this kind of really cool knowledge exchange, and if it started with little people, because like, you know, they're the ones who can be melded the most, that's how you begin to affect change, because it's literally just being aware that your world isn't your world.
That's right.
It's we're all interconnected. We're all stronger together.
Nailed it. On that note, I mean, this is not super, I mean, this is related. I think that could even happen in New York City. I mean, there was a report recently that New York City's schools are some of the most segregated in the country.
Not surprising.
But what that means is that education that we think probably all New Yorkers are getting about exposure to other cultures, exposures to other ways of living, classes, family backgrounds, that isn't even happening in our own schools. And that's a local change. That's a local issue. That's something that will be relevant next year. It's something that
school districts
should be relevant when you call your council member. And it should be relevant when you go out to a community meeting, which probably maybe one person listening to this podcast will do. But all of
more
those
if you're going to do that now, because we've talked about it for now.
And if you're talking about ways to affect change at the local level, that's one of them.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, look, if you think of certain schools in certain parts of town in New York City have the most amazing public schools, and what do parents do to get their kids into those schools versus the schools that are falling down because parents aren't able to do that. So you already begin to create these craters and disconnects so early on that, like, you can't be surprised when this happens. And, like, you're like, oh, it's a tectonic shift.
Yeah. I built a system where the school that you go to will largely be determined by your race, where you were born, what street you lived on. I mean, already you're setting us as a society up to fail the diversity test, which will lead to sort of a understanding.
Well, that's where the empathy disappears, because if you don't have, if you don't intrinsically see, like, oh, okay, well, these kids are different than me, but they're no different than me because we all go to the same school.
Yeah,
that helps. But if it's like, well, you grew up on Upper East Side of this street and you're on the Upper East Side of this street, then you go to these two different schools. The only times you ever see them is it like, you know, it's the black team versus the white team playing basketball, and you get these thought processes like how intrinsically how these people are going to be. Then you have this inherent fear, and then that's what ends up happening.
Yeah, I think it's finding a way to channel your anger at the results of this election in the way that's best for you to be effective. And in some cases, it's being angry and getting to the streets and ensuring that Trump knows that undocumented immigrants will be safe in New York, and supporting organizations like the Make the Road New York that hosted that excellent march and protest over the weekend. And in other cases, it's being somebody who isn't afraid to be triggered maybe by somebody who says something really racist and engaging them and fighting back and teaching empathy through your lived experience. It totally depends on who you are, what you're capable of doing, and what you have the resources to do.
So where do you think we go from here in 2017? like what are your predictions?
So 2017, there's a local election. The mayor's running for re-election.
So like perfect example. So mayor's running for re-election. How many people are running against him?
Good question. I don't know. That's the answer. There are a few people. I also have to be careful, right? Because this is close to my job. But there's been a few people who have expressed interest. The mayor's gaining strength because of this election, this 2016 election, because he's so clearly the opposite.
Right.
And so that's playing a role in what will happen in 2017. There's questions if there will be a Republican challenger with the backing of the White House who runs against New York City's mayor. That's something that might happen. The issues on the local level that will be relevant are things like education, diversity of our education. Homelessness is huge right
It's
now
a
in New York
huge
City.
problem. I mean, I've seen such a rapid change in like how it's gotten way worse.
Yeah, 31% of New Yorkers disapprove of how homelessness is being managed right now under this current
How is it
mayor.
not 70%?
Yeah.
It's like, it is not cool. I feel horrible.
It is 70%. 31% approve of how the mayor
Oh,
is
I was going to say,
dealing
like,
with the issue.
girl, because it is, and I just think of the winter and like how I always empathize with people who have lost their home because like, you just think of how cold it is.
It's really
here
sad.
in
Yeah.
New York.
Yeah, so there's issues like homelessness that will be really relevant. I think for me, issues that will be relevant is how our local government will protect us against federal policies I disagree with. So for me, I'm going to be a climate voter, an immigrant rights voter, a women's issues voter. Those things are especially important to me now in the light of this election. And I think most importantly, what we can probably predict is that very few people compared to the registered voting population will turn out. And
So you think they still won't change?
I think turnout will be low unless we all decide today we're going to be really active and saying a way to channel your anger at this 2016 election is to be active in 2017. It has to be a conscious effort to change the trend in voting that's been happening in mayoral elections here, which is
It's
down.
downward.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about getting involved,
Yeah, absolutely.
having empathy, but also having the courage to stand up for what you believe in, and not
and bearing
rolling
that
over.
burden, unfortunately.
Yeah, and not rolling over because I have to be perfect.
Yeah. And taking the time to learn the systems that have failed us. I mean,
If you're mad about a system, work on ways to change it.
I think a lot of people are like, oh man, you're a lobbyist. Like, you're probably a really bad person. And I'm like, no, I just really love learning how systems work and figuring out how to affect change within them. I think that's what the job of a lobbyist is in New York. And I think all of us have to be our own lobbyists. I've given workshops on how to lobby effectively because at the end of the day, you're your best advocate. And if you know who to advocate to and how to advocate, you can create change no matter who you are.
What an awesome way to end the show. Oh my God, girl. Look at you all wrapping it up in a little bow.
Oh, man.
Thank you so much,
course.
Safeena. I mean, such an awesome conversation. We could probably talk for hours about this. Thank you so much for coming.
Of course.
I will put lots of things in the show notes about this. So places that you can donate, those steps that you can turn in terms of getting locally involved.
Yes.
Is there a site we can find out how to get in where your local community board is to see how you can get yourself either go to meetings or sign up? So we'll put all that information, in the show notes. Personally, look, I'm a fierce Democrat lefty. I don't think anyone who's listening to this podcast who's seen my picture would think otherwise. But if you are horrified or upset by this election, and I know a lot of us are, the best way you can affect change is to actually do something instead of sharing a post on Facebook.
Yep.
So if that means calling your local official, whether that means donating to charities, that's how you can begin to affect change. And what Safeena has been talking about are actionable things you can do tomorrow. And I hope that you will. And that's our show. Thanks very much. The Reset Podcast is sponsored by Bose. With my new Bose QC35 headphones, nothing gets between me and my music. The noise canceling is world class. They're completely Bluetooth, so there's no wires. The sound is amazing. My producer and I love these so much that we use them to record every single show. For more information about Bose QC35 headphones and other Bose products, check out Bose.com.
Audiation.